Hello fam, welcome back to the Eat Like a Beer podcast. I'm here today doing my first recording for 2026, which is awesome. Obviously we dropped an episode a few days ago, but we did actually record that before the holidays. So this is the first time back on the mic in literally a month, which is awesome. I'm stoked to be here. I'm going to do what I am going to call a short episode today, but we always know those are my famous last words. We'll see how she goes. But what I want to talk about today is a little bit of like a niche kind of topic or question or just like position people can find themselves in. And I think it's just kind of cool to break this down because in my opinion, what we're going to look at today is one of the worst positions a person can get into. And what it is that I want to look at is if we think about the fact that in order to achieve fat loss, we need to be in a calorie deficit, and a calorie deficit is an energy deficit. What I want to look at is what is going on when we find ourselves in the position of feeling like we have really low energy, but we're not achieving fat loss. Because if we look at that right there, it's like, well, if fat loss is achieved through an energy deficit is insufficient energy. If a person is feeling like they have low energy, you're essentially saying, I feel like I have insufficient energy, right? So if I feel like I have insufficient energy, but I'm not getting the result that I would expect to be getting from insufficient energy, aka fat loss, because that is how fat loss is achieved. What is going on? Why do I feel like I don't have any energy, but I'm not getting the outcome of a person who actually has insufficient energy coming in? And like I said, I think this is one of the worst positions that a person can get into because nobody wants to feel like they have insufficient energy. I can't imagine any scenario in life where someone's like, oh, hopefully I feel like I don't have any energy, right? Like no one wants to be in that position. So when people intentionally put themselves in a position to have insufficient energy, usually they're doing it because they want the outcome of what happens when we have insufficient energy being fat loss. So if we come back to being in that position where it's like, I'm feeling the effects of this thing, but I'm not getting the result. And if we look at that deeper, I'm feeling the negative effects of this thing and I'm not getting the result. Like I said, this is one of the worst positions to get into. And I think there can be a few things that can contribute to this, but I just want to look at one of them today because this one is something that's like, once we understand this, we can make sure we're not doing it and we can implement and put in place what we need to avoid getting in this position. So this is the easiest thing to do because it's completely within our control. If we find ourselves in this position, do this first and then see how things go, and you could really overcome this problem quite quickly. Also, side note guys, I don't know if it's coming through on the mic, but I feel so puffed right now. Like literally talking is making me puffed. So that's what happens when you have a month off podcasting. I feel like I've lost all my fitness and conditioning when it comes to ranting. So we'll see how she goes throughout the year, but I'm struggling already 2 minutes in. But if we start to break this down, usually what's going on here, and we've spoken about this on the podcast before, but I don't feel like we've spoken about it when we're addressing this particular problem and question. So if you're a regular listener, I think you'll understand all of this pretty quickly. If you're not and you've just stumbled across the pod, welcome. We are stoked to have you here. You have a lot of listening to catch up on. But what we want to look at is, let's say, for example, someone is actually putting an intentional calorie deficit in place, right? And we just said that is making yourself intentionally insufficient in energy. If we don't know, the reason that we do this is because body fat is stored energy. So if we do not give the body enough energy, it uses its stored energy, which is body fat. And this is exactly how fat loss occurs. So if someone is intentionally putting themselves into an energy deficit, it's for that reason. I'm going to give myself less energy, so I use my stored energy, aka body fat, because I want to achieve fat loss right now. And then on the flip side, when we have sufficient energy coming in, this is what we are looking at when we're sitting at what we call our maintenance calories, or we're eating at maintenance, we're sitting at maintenance, etc. Essentially, it's like saying, I am eating the amount of energy / the amount of calories that's required for me to maintain. I'm not putting that energy deficit in place because I don't want to use up stored energy in my body. I want to maintain my body composition and the amount of body fat I have. So I'm going to eat in a way that promotes my body doing that and doesn't promote my body dipping into its energy stores. And so it's important to just understand those two things, like the energy deficit or the calorie deficit and maintenance, in order to explain what I'm about to explain. Let's say somebody knows that their maintenance intake is around 2,200 calories. And then therefore they might know that their calorie deficit is around 1,700 calories, meaning if this person consumes 1,700 calories, they're in a calorie deficit, aka they have insufficient energy coming into their body. Therefore their body starts to use its stored energy, which is body fat. And then anytime they want to maintain their body fat levels and their body composition, they consume 2,200 calories and they're sitting at maintenance. What tends to be happening when a person feels like they have low energy coming in and they're feeling the negative consequences of low energy, but they are not achieving fat loss, is usually that this person is planning days and aiming to be in a calorie deficit. So if we use those number examples that I just said, in this example, this person is planning days at 1,700 calories. If we think about, and if you're experienced with tracking your food and monitoring your intake at all, you'll know what this is like. But if we think about someone planning days in a calorie deficit, you literally have less calories to spend compared to when you're doing it at maintenance. Again, this example I just said, this person's maintenance is 2,200, their deficit is 1,700. So therefore, when they're planning days in that deficit, they literally have 500 less calories to spend every day. And the reason I bring this up is because when we do this, just by default, we obviously can't consume as many calories and plan our days as optimally as we can when we're at maintenance in regards to planning things like pre-training nutrition, post-training nutrition, strategically timing things like protein throughout the day, maybe prioritizing carbohydrates at night if we're doing early morning training, and so many other little things that we can do with nutrient timing. If we think about having an extra 500 calories up our sleeve, it's obviously easier to plan all these things and we have more calories to allocate towards these things. So what I'm getting at here is, if somebody is planning their days to hit their deficit intake, they've got less calories to spend. Therefore, when they're planning things like pre-training nutrition, post-training nutrition, and then the rest of their meals throughout the day, we aren't always able to get the most optimal amount of calories in for all of those things. And that's just how it is. This is why, we've spoken about so many times why we don't want to spend a long time in a deficit, why if we have performance goals, we don't want to be in a deficit, because we literally cannot consume enough energy at all of the times that we would want to optimize performance and fueling and all of these things we always talk about. So anytime we're intentionally going into a deficit, we want to understand this and just know that those things are going to take a bit of a hit. And therefore, like I always say, we want this time to be short, sharp, effective. We want to get in, do that deficit, and then get out of it so we can have more calories to spend towards those things. But coming back to the person who's struggling with energy and not seeing results, if you are planning your day to hit your deficit intake and you're like, yep, I can't fit in that many calories towards pre-training, that just is what it is. Can't fit in that many calories towards post-training, just is what it is. Obviously, my meals throughout the day are a bit smaller, my dinner's a bit smaller, etc., because I'm making it fit into my lower calorie target, right? But, and here's our big but, and this is where our problem comes in. If a person is doing this and then they are not adhering to that plan, and they're snacking on little things throughout the day, like our really common occurrences we see with this is maybe having a few biscuits when you go into the work tea room, or having a few bites or spoonfuls of other people's dinners while you're making dinner for everybody, or having a few bites of the kids' lunches when you're making it for them, or having a few bites of your own lunch for tomorrow when you're making it, or spooning peanut butter out of the jar or Nutella out of the jar or anything like that, and thinking that these things are quite little. If we look at what's going on here, again, we'll use those examples we said before. If this person is aiming for fat loss, so they've planned a day to hit 1,700 calories and their actual planned food does hit that 1,700 calories, but then they do snack on all those little things I just mentioned. Let's say they go into the work tea room and they do have 2 biscuits and that's 100 calories. And then when they're cooking dinner for their family or their partner or whatever, they have a few spoonfuls of that and there's another 100 calories. And then at some point, maybe throughout the day or at night, you have a couple of spoons of peanut butter out of the jar and that's 200 calories. Peanut butter racks up. We've spoken about this before, but let's say there's 3 or 4 things throughout the day that weren't part of your planned day and they each contribute 1 to 200 calories. Let's say 150 on average. So you have 3 things throughout the day that bring in an extra 150 calories for you, but they weren't part of your planned day. Using those numbers we looked at before, if you were aiming for 1,700 calories, but then you consume 150 calories extra 3 times that day, you've consumed an extra 450 calories, meaning your intake is now at 2,150. We said for this person, their maintenance was around 2,200. You are now consuming very close to your maintenance intake, if not your maintenance intake, right? Because it's always going to be a little bit give or take. So you're basically eating at maintenance, but you're planning your days to be in a deficit and your goal is to be in a deficit. So this is why it's a shitty position to be in, because your goal is fat loss. But what you are doing is not leading to fat loss. But like we said at the start of the episode, you're experiencing that negative consequence of low energy. And the reason why is because even though you do have sufficient energy coming in, because let's remember, sufficient energy is another word for maintenance. When we are eating at our maintenance intake, that means we are not eating in a deficit. We are eating the amount of calories / energy that our body needs every day to maintain. So when we have sufficient energy coming in, we are eating at maintenance. But what's usually happening for people in this position, and this is where the real shittiness occurs, because you are aiming for low calories, but you've actually ended up consuming your maintenance calories, but you haven't consumed those extra calories in a strategic way to support your energy levels. Let's really look at this for a second, because this is the problem. Yes, we have sufficient energy coming in overall. If you are maintaining, if you have a fat loss goal and you are not seeing fat loss over a consistent period of time, that means you are consuming your body's maintenance intake, aka you are consuming the amount of energy / calories that your body personally needs to maintain its current position. And like I keep saying, that is just another way of saying my body has sufficient energy coming in. But if you are feeling like you don't have sufficient energy, aka you're feeling the effects of low energy, it's because you're planning days to hit that lower intake, and therefore you're not strategically planning how to use that sufficient energy. So if we look at this closely, if we are going into a training session and we're in that mindset of thinking, I'm aiming for a calorie deficit, therefore I don't have many calories to spend, therefore I can't prioritize a really decent pre-training meal, right? Because I don't have the calories to do so. So we go into a training session with insufficient energy coming in for that session. What we have consumed in the lead up to that session was not the most optimal amount to fuel it. Then we do the session and then we come out the other side. And when we go into our post-training meal, again, we're trying to budget our calories because we're trying to keep ourselves in a calorie deficit and we're aiming for a calorie deficit. So when we're planning that post-training meal, which is where our recovery starts, we're not hitting the most optimal amount of nutrients and calories and everything that we would want to recover as optimally as we could from that session. So if we look at pre-training for a second, really quickly, I'll skim over this, but we want pre-training simple carbohydrates to come in, and then post-training, we want protein and more carbohydrates to come in to start to fuel the rebuild and repair process of training, and also replenish muscle glycogen that we would have lost during that training session. It's very hard to do that on low calories. Again, this is why we say to people who are chasing big performance goals, don't put yourself on low calories, because it is so hard to perform well, train well, recover well, etc. when you don't have the calories to do so, right? So if we come back to the person in the deficit, they don't have the calories to put the most optimal amounts of these things in place, so they're not doing that. So they go into training feeling a little bit underfueled, therefore I feel a little bit low in energy, right? During my session, I feel a little bit low in energy. When I come out of that session, I feel a little bit low in energy because I am not optimally structuring my energy to support this session because I'm trying to be in a deficit. And then let's just say a person's training early in the morning, but you could apply this to whatever time of the day you train. But if you do that early morning and then you go into your morning tea and your lunch and your afternoon tea, and again, you've got your deficit and your fat loss goal in mind. So all of these meals are a bit smaller, like you're trying to keep the calories down so you can stick within your calorie deficit. So again, we haven't really fueled that rebuild and repair. We haven't replenished the muscle glycogen that we lost in that early session. So that low energy continues all throughout the day. And this is why we have people in the position of going, I feel like I have low energy. And then often, not always, but often what's happening for people in this position is they are sticking and adhering to that deficit throughout the day. And it's usually like more towards the end of the day that it might start to come undone. And like I said, maybe you've then gone through all of those things that I just said, and you've felt that slightly, or maybe intensely, but you've felt that low energy throughout that whole day up until like 2 p.m., let's say, because you've been intentionally consuming lower calories than your body needs. It makes sense that you felt low in energy, right? That absolutely makes sense. But if you then have an afternoon and an evening where you have a smallish low calorie dinner planned, again, to just fit into your targets, but then you do just have those couple of biscuits in the work tea room and a couple of spoonfuls of the peanut butter or Biscoff or whatever it is, and a few bites of other people's meals as you're making dinner or lunches, etc., Like we said before, this is often enough to pull somebody up to their maintenance intake for the day. So then right there, we've essentially said like, no fat loss is happening today, right? And if we think about a person who is doing this, most people are doing this, like if you end up in this position, most people are doing this every day or most days of the week. And so if what you're doing most of the time is putting your body in a position where it goes, no fat loss is occurring today because you have consumed too many calories for my body personally or for your body personally to achieve fat loss. Well, again, of course, it makes sense that you're not going to achieve that fat loss, but you have still spent a large part of that day feeling like you don't have energy. Because if we think about what we just explained, you've gone through early training and then working and low calorie meals and all that throughout the day because you planned all of that for low calories. So low calories is low energy. Of course, you're feeling the effects of low energy. Can we see how it's all tying in? But then little things are coming in the afternoon or the evening that are just creeping those calories up enough to put you at maintenance, but they're not putting calories into your day in that strategic, optimal way to combat that feeling of low energy that you have for so much of that day. And then a really similar thing can happen when we look at people who maybe have a deficit in place most of the week, but then go off track or do different shit on the weekends. And again, if we think about somebody who spends, say, 4 or 5 days of the week aiming for low calories, hitting those low calories, and therefore going through that process, like we just said, where you're feeling the effects of that low energy for most of that day. And for people in this position, they might not be having the little snacks and afternoon teas and stuff during the day. They might actually be hitting those low calories all throughout the week, which, if anything, your energy is probably just going to feel even lower, right? But again, that makes sense. And that's part of a fat loss phase and an energy deficit. We are going to feel the effects of low energy. But if you do that for a few days and then you get to those weekends and you do stray from that and go out for a few meals and snack on a few things or just get into a mindset of like, it's the weekend, I'll just do whatever. Like, people can tackle these or approach these in so many different ways. But really what we want to look at here is if whatever you're doing is then resulting in you over consuming. And what usually happens in this example is like the calories during the week have been very low. The calories during the weekend have been very high in relation to the weekday calories. And then the overall intake is averaging out at maintenance. So I'm not going to do the math, so this is going to be really loose, but let's say someone does need 1,700 calories in place to achieve fat loss. They might actually hit that on a daily basis for 4 days of the week, but then they might have 3 days that are up in the 3,000 calories. And then if we look at the average of that, their overall average intake might be in those low to mid 2,000s. And again, think about that example we've been using. If your average intake is in those low to mid 2,000s, and that's your maintenance intake, it makes sense that you're going to maintain. But then we come back to this person and it's like, well, you've probably felt the impact of low energy for 4 to 5 days of the week, but you are not getting the result of an energy deficit. So you feel deficient in energy, but you are not getting the result of an energy deficit. And again, come back to what I said at the very start. This is one of the worst positions to be in because who wants to feel like, I feel like I have no energy all the time, but I've got nothing to show for that. There's no positive outcome. There's no positive result, but I'm just feeling the negative effects of that all the time, or most of the time at least. And obviously I just want to preface, guys, like I'm all about flexible dieting, enjoying meals out, eating out. Like I'm not saying we can't do these things. What I'm saying is we want to understand this shit. You want to understand that if you have a fat loss goal, you need to have a calorie deficit in place in order to achieve fat loss. Calorie deficit is an energy deficit. You are intentionally making your body deficient in energy if you want to pursue fat loss. So you are going to feel that to some extent. And there's things that we can do in terms of like food volume, food quality, etc. I'm not going to get into that today. We've spoken about that so many times and I'm sure we'll speak about it again. There's things that we can do to offset that feeling of low energy, but we do need the energy deficit in place. So if you're going to endure that and you're going to feel that, you want to get the result. You want to get the outcome that you actually wanted. There's a reason people put themselves in an energy deficit, and it's to achieve fat loss. So if you are going to endure the consequences of low energy, You want to get that fat loss result, because the reason I say this is one of the worst positions people can get into is because if we think about doing this over a 12-week period, let's say you're going to go into a deficit for like Jan, Feb, March, which I'm sure so many people listening probably are. First of all, I said the other day on the podcast that you want to be really aware of the shit that has held you back in recent years and the shit that has cock blocked you from getting results in recent years. And I guarantee for a lot of people listening, this would be one of them. Having that intention to aim for low calories and therefore planning days and putting days in place that are low calorie and actually sticking to that enough of the time to feel a bit shitty, but not sticking to it enough of the time to get the positive outcome. It is so important to really understand what I've just spoken about here and think about if this has been a problem for you in the past. You want to acknowledge that right now and go, if I do want to pursue fat loss over Jan, Feb, March, I have to understand what Ruby's just explained. I have to think about whether this has been something that's been a problem for me in the past. And if it has, what am I going to do about it? And really what we want to do about it is just understand it so we can say, if I continue with that habit, it's not going to work. And if it's not going to work, I may as well not do it. Because again, it's such a shit position to get into, to be like, wow, I just spent the last 3 months feeling like I have low energy, but I did not get the result that I wanted. I have nothing to show for 3 months of low energy. I'm pausing just to let that sink in, because low energy is just one of them. I'm trying not to go off on my usual tangent of listing all of the negative consequences of a calorie deficit, but we know things like hunger, performance, recovery, sleep, mood, libido. She's rattling them off again, but we know that all of these things are a negative consequence of having an energy deficit in place. So if we have that in place enough of the time that we start to feel those things, and especially in this episode, we're focusing on the actual feeling of low energy. If we have an energy deficit in place enough of the time that we are feeling this, but we then also stray from it enough of the time, you're coming back to that position that I've just explained like 10 times. I'm feeling the effects of this and I'm not getting the result. So this is where you would want to look and go, I have to understand this and I have to decide, am I actually in a position like schedule-wise, mindset-wise, intensity, discipline, whatever the hell it is that you want to describe it as, but you have to decide, am I actually going to put this energy deficit in place and stick to it? Am I going to put this energy deficit in place and stick to it? I'm saying it again so you can ask yourself again, because people hear this and they go, yeah, I'm good, I'll stick to it. Like, yeah, so keen for fat loss, new year, new me, January, let's effing go. Like all of these hype up things, the hype is great at the start of the week and at the start of the day. As that week goes on and as that day goes on, if those little things start to creep in that start to pull you out of that deficit, all of your hype doesn't mean shit because you are not getting anywhere. And I don't say this to be rude or to be harsh. I'm saying it to bring the awareness, because I've seen people do this for such a long time. At the start of the year, coming into summer, middle of the year, whenever it is, name your time. There's hundreds of thousands of people doing this. So if we are going into a fat loss phase, if you have a fat loss goal right now, you want to be asking those questions of like, can I actually stick to this? Am I going to stick to this? Or do I feel like I'm going to stray from it enough that it's actually not going to work and therefore I'm going to waste 3 months? And I think I said that in the episode the other day. So often we have people who want to build their physique or work towards performance goals and get in, like enter big events or chase sporting goals and all these things, which is awesome. I'm all for it. But if we spend so much time chasing this deficit but not really implementing it, we do just waste so much time. So it's so important to understand this and just ask those questions. If I have a fat loss goal, am I actually going to really stick to this enough over the next few months to make this work? If you are, amen, awesome, go off. I love it. But it's important to ask that question and really be honest with yourself, because if you're not, if you look at that and you go, yeah, you know what, like, I am so snacky. I am so tired. I am actually training a lot. I am actually prepping for big goals. I've got big things coming up. I'm going to be more hungry. I'm going to probably go outside of these calories. You want to actually acknowledge that and go, okay, well, maybe it's not the right time for me to put myself into an energy deficit. And we've spoken about this in so many ways before, like so many reasons why it might or might not be the right time for you. But this is just an important one to understand. If you do find yourself in that position pretty regularly, or you have found yourself in that position before of just saying, I feel like my energy levels are very low, But I've had a fat loss goal maybe for a while, or been pursuing fat loss either on or off or for a long time, anything like that. And I'm feeling the negative consequence of that, especially being low energy, but I don't feel like I'm getting the result of insufficient energy, aka an energy deficit, calorie deficit, fat loss. I'm going to wrap it up there because otherwise I'm just going to keep talking in circles, but just some really cool shit to understand and just have that understanding and awareness and think about it either right now if you are going into a fat loss phase or anything like that, or if you do have one scheduled or you've got plans this year, you really want to understand that. Or if you're in a fat loss phase at the moment, or you've been in one recently and you're like, why am I not getting anywhere, but I'm feeling like shit, like it's all just kind of compiling in this way, you want to understand it and definitely intercept it. That is all from me today. I will be back next week. Plenty more to say. The Eat Like Ruby podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or dietary advice. The advice given in this episode is general in nature and should not be used to treat any medical conditions, health conditions, illnesses, injuries, and/or any nutrition-related conditions, deficiencies, or similar. This podcast is not to be used as or in place of medical advice or dietary advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before implementing any of the advice, information, or protocols discussed in this episode.